When Durant turned the bend about 900 meters from the entrance, Caitlin and James glanced back at the bouncing flashlight. It took him 5 minutes to reach them at a steady pace. "What did you find?" asked Caitlin as Durant came out of the gloom. "Bunch of barges. They turned them into barracks. No Germans, though, alive or dead. There's a ton of food and supplies. We're going to stock up the front barge, then try to float it down here. James, Sergeant, could use your help." Finn sat back. He tapped the MG. "I'm staying here, Lieutenant. I can take responsibility for anything trying to come in this way. You do whatever you think is right from the other direction, eh?" Durant nodded. The Irishman's recalcitrance was annoying him. "All right." "James." "Yes, sir." James stood and fell in beside him. They headed back toward the barge barracks. When they were out of earshot, James whispered, "You think Sergeant Renoir's okay? He sure doesn't seem like his old self." "I don't know. Probably just tired," said Durant. James shrugged his shoulders. "Yeah, maybe. I suppose. I guess I'd be scared of water for all the days of my life if I ever got drowned by some devils. Heck, I ain't too keen on fire after last night, and they never even got me quite onto the spit." But the laugh was hollowed out by the fear beneath it. Durant did not reply. They walked on in silence for 10 minutes until they reached the lock. Francois was by the upper gate handle. "Did you get it figured out?" asked Durant. "Oui," Francois replied. "Turning this handle will lift the rear sluice gate. Water will flow under and fill the lock. The gates on the opposite side has gearing that will open it and allow the barge to come through once the water height is equivalent." "Okay," said Durant. "Let's get all the food we can carry from the kitchen, and then we'll haul it all to the entrance on the barge." Isaiah moved quickly, despite the hitch in his gait from the lion's strike. After he rounded a long bend, he looked behind him. There was nothing to say the others were back there, just the dark and heaviness of the tunnel and flashes of the thick green algae in the canal caught by the lantern's circle of light. He felt a chill run down his spine. "God damn," he said. "Just keep walking, just keep on walking." Isaiah took his own advice and continued on, the mastiff in tow. After a couple 100 paces, he edged past another of the inert electric barge-hauling tractors. Just beyond it, he found a door in the tunnel's wall. He paused and inspected it with a lantern. The door itself was as old as the tunnel, but above it, someone had recently drilled through the stone. The wires that ran to the ceiling to power the barge tractors through the canal, along with the wires that strung the overhead incandescents together, ran into the hole from both directions. "Found your damn generator, Jerry, didn't I?" Isaiah tested the door handle. It took some effort, but it turned, and the thick steel swung open. He lifted the lantern and leaned in the entryway. A tight, dark, spiral staircase ran up the shaft. The thick black wires disappeared up with them, vanishing into the darkness above. Shit. He looked back the way he'd come. As much as he was pulled to turn on the lights first, he knew time was passing. The sunset would come and bring its miseries and monsters. Turning lights on should not be the priority. Finding anybody down here, dead or living, and handling the situation was the key to surviving until dawn. "Okay, I'll be back for you." He closed the door and turned to the path. He geared up to a steady jog, with the mastiff loping easily beside him. 1,000 yards on, he found another set of barges. The Germans seemed a meticulous folk. The barges were set up the same as the first group they had encountered, and again, not a single body to be seen. After walking the final barge in the group, he and the dog continued up the mule path for another 1,000 yards. They found 5 more barges docked there, different from the ones they had already passed. The first in the train was devoted to aviation. There were spare wing trusses and rolls of canvas, along with big vats of glue for repairs. There was an orderly pile of polished wooden propellers, 6 brand new boxed engines, and a dozen IMG-08 machine guns, with replacement trigger assemblies and the genius synchronization gears that guaranteed the bullets would not chew the front props of the biplanes to splinters. In the second barge, he found more of the same, along with barrels of oil and 2 30-yard-long petrol cylinders marked benzene, filled with thousands of gallons of fuel for the fighter craft. The next 2 barges were brimming with supplies for the field kitchens. An army could hold this position for months without resupply. Isaiah was again glad he would not be part of laying it under siege. The last barge in the group was a floating armory. Isaiah jimmied open a few boxes and found them filled with greased rifles, box upon box of ammunition and grenades, bayonets and spare magazines. Beyond the final barge was a floor-to-ceiling poured concrete wall. An electric tractor mule was parked on the tracks in front of its door. Isaiah scooted past the tractor and opened the door. It swung inward, and Isaiah stepped through its black portal. His lamp's beams stared into a void. The tunnel continued, disappearing into nothingness. Well, Jesus goddamn, this thing just goes and goes, doesn't it? He appeared back the way they'd come. The Mastiff watched him, awaiting his decision. Shit. Guess we can't leave it to chance. Come on, girl. Isaiah and the big dog continued. He sang quietly as they walked, giving himself a steady cadence. Whoa, Black Betty, bam-ba-lam, whoa, Black Betty, bam-ba-lam. His voice murmured gently back to him off the arched ceiling in the water. It took the pair another half an hour to reach the far end of the Riekewald tunnel. He passed 3 more empty barracks flotillas on the way. It ended in a concrete machine gun nest that twinned the one 6 kilometers away. As they walked out onto its deck and looked through the murder holes, 50 yards out, the half moon of cold, late afternoon sun revealed the tunnel mouth. Isaiah walked to the exit door and tested it. It swung outward easily. A thick wooden beam rested against the wall beside it. He pulled the door shut and hefted the beam into its brackets, sealing it tight as a drum. It would take a battering ram to get through it. He could not fathom a way to make it more secure than it was. Isaiah patted the Mastiff's head. Time's wasting, Black Betty. Come on. Let's go back and try and get them lights on. 30 minutes later, Isaiah and Black Betty hit the central wall. They passed through its door and Isaiah slammed it shut. There was no locking mechanism and no beam to secure it. He turned round. His eyes settled on the tractor. He walked over and used the lantern to inspect the electric mule. There was a long handle with a release lever at the hand grip. Isaiah squeezed the lever and released the brake. He climbed down and set the lantern onto the tracks. Then he leaned on the front of the tractor and pushed. The Mastiff barked while he strained. Then the tractor budged, rolling backward on the tracks. Once it got moving, he drove with his legs until it was flowing smoothly. It caught momentum and Isaiah moved along with it. As it neared the door, he let go and it kept on, slow and heavy, then struck the steel door with a booming clang. Isaiah caught the rebound and pushed back, edging the tractor right up to the door. Then he climbed up into the cockpit and pulled the handbrake into the locked position. That ought to hold him off for a minute. Hey, girl. The mastiff barked and wagged her tail in what seemed agreement. Isaiah scratched her behind the ears and looked into her eyes. That lion was my daddy. Who the hell are you, girl? Who the hell are you? In you, the idea was absurd. Come on, Black Betty, let's go. Isaiah picked up the lantern and started back through the Reekvold tunnel. They passed the strung-together vacant barges as they went. They looked like floating ghost towns. Finally, they reached the doorway that the wiring flowed up into. Isaiah eased open the door to the spiral staircase. The mastiff sniffed the air, then started climbing the stairs on her own. Fuck, said Isaiah. Here we go then, Betty. He took the shotgun off his shoulder and cocked the hammer. Then he followed the mastiff and his lantern's beams up the stairs. Durant, James, and Francois took 3 trips back and forth to the kitchen barge, carrying cans of corned beef, rock-hard biscuits, and turnip flour bread. There were a few large vats by the stoves. Durant lifted a lid and found gallons of cold pea soup with what he assumed were chunks of horse meat floating in it. The smell did not inspire any appetite in any of them, and the wood-burning stoves that could warm the vats were too cumbersome to consider taking off the barge, so they left the soup to rot where it was. Once they'd loaded the barge in the lower lock with enough food to feed them 5 times over, they paused. Durant looked back the way Isaiah and the dog had gone. He and Francois made eye contact. He will be back, Francois said. We will hear the shotgun if something bad occurs. Durant checked his wristwatch. Almost 5:30. Sunset was 2 hours away. We'll feel the lock now. Yes? Said Francois. Durant nodded. Okay. Sounds good. Francois climbed up onto the mule path and headed to the sluice gears at the top gate. He turned the handle and the gears spun a large, saw-toothed steel wheel. The gate below the surface lifted open and the water silently flowed through and started filling the lock. Francois stood back and watched. The mastiff and Isaiah climbed a spiral staircase taller than he had imagined possible. It must have run for 6 stories. Isaiah wiped away sweat from his face. It was not terribly warm, but the air was growing thick and a feeling of suffocation, stoked by the tight confines, was starting to envelop him. When they finally reached the top stairs, they found another door waiting for them. Isaiah opened it quietly and stepped through, followed by the hound. He found himself in a massive underground bunker. A huge metal contraption filled the space floor to ceiling. God damn, girl. Look at what we have here. Isaiah walked the circumference of the machine, followed by the mastiff. A large nameplate on the side read, Eberfeld 1 milliwatt generator. On the near end of the generator, he found an inlet pipe that pumped water into the boiler for conversion into steam power. Below it, he opened the doors of a massive firebox built for heating the water. In its belly, there were nothing but remnants of burned-out coal. His lantern found a pile of fresh coal behind him. A shovel stood upright in the pile, impaled into it. Well, Black Betty, guess I got some shoveling to do. Isaiah set the shotgun down against the wall. He set up the lantern so it lit the firebox. He spat on his hands and rubbed them together, then pulled the shovel out of the pile and began digging into the mound of coal. It took him 10 minutes to fill the firebox. After it was brimming with cold fuel, he searched the basement for an ignition source. The lantern revealed a large fuel can full of kerosene, Beside it were a stash of kerosene lanterns, Vulcan Lucifer matchboxes, and a box piled high with fire rags. Isaiah doused a rag, held it by the corner, and lit it with a match. The oily rag burst into blue flames, and he tossed it into the firebox before it could singe his fingers. The licking flame caught the coal quickly, and it billowed white smoke up the chimney. Isaiah shut the firebox doors and sat back, feeling the heat fill the room. He took the lantern and walked through the rest of the basement, inspecting the machine. At the center of the generator was a control station. The shaft that the coming steam would spin ran through it to an armature and brushes that would create and capture electricity to feed the bulbs and tractors below. All that remained now was for the water to reach a boil. As they found a set of stairs beyond the generator, he crossed over to them, the mastiff at his heels. As they neared it, the mastiff paused. Her hackles rose up sharply, her teeth bared, and a low growl thrummed in her throat. "Shh, girl." Her growl silenced, but her hackles remained high. Isaiah raised the shotgun. All instincts told him not to, but he proceeded up the stairs anyway, the mastiff just behind him. As they reached the door at the top and opened it, light spilled down into the stairwell. As they turned the lantern down and placed it on the top step, he let the shotgun's barrel lead him into the room. The kitchen was expansive and fairly well equipped. He passed through it and into the large open space of a dining room. A long table, surrounded by chairs from end to end, was central. Isaiah glanced out tall, western-facing windows. It surprised him to see that snow had been falling. The fat flakes had already turned the large stretch of fields beyond the windows grey and white. The sun still shone above the horizon, a violently bright ball, casting a ribbon of bright pink below the clouds, and turning the storm clouds themselves into a bouquet of gold and orange and red, all tumbling and billowing westward as the snow fell from them. Isaiah had never seen anything like it. He walked through the dining room and inspected the table. Whatever the manor house had been, it was now a command center. Maps of the Western Front with bright red and blue lines showing the cut of trenches littered the table, along with boxes and boxes of communiques and stacks of orders in German. Isaiah perused it. The clinical, ordered, sane rationales for all the insanity. It continued on. "Hello?" Nothing in response. The house was silent, but the silence felt like that of a morgue, not a sanctuary. Isaiah made his way out of the dining room, then through what had been a large sitting room. It looked like a stockyard floor now. There were pools of dried blood everywhere. The scent of it was raw and bitter, but the bodies of the men who had left the stains were long gone. The mastiff prowled and sniffed through it. Beyond an enormous stone fireplace, Isaiah found a stairway to the second floor. "Hello, anybody?" he said. No one answered. Isaiah climbed the stairs. When he got to the top floor, he found the first of the bedrooms. Inside was a bed. Its pillow was a bloody mess. There were spare field grey officers' uniforms hung in the closet. There were knickknacks on the bedside table and a wedding photograph with the inhabitant of the photo proudly standing by his bride, likely the owner of the uniforms, knickknacks, and bloody pillow. Of him there was no sign. Isaiah pressed on. More vacant bedrooms, but no congealed blood in these. At the far end of the hallway he found the master suite. When he saw what was in it, his heart skipped a beat. The soles of the man's boots were facing him from the foot of the bed. Isaiah gripped the shotgun pump and eased his way into the room. The Mastiff was close at his side, focused on the large body on the mattress. The man in the boots was big and beefy. He looked like he was lying in state at his own funeral, atop blood-spattered sheets, wearing the uniform of a top-ranking field sergeant. It was a filthy mess. His jacket was half unbuttoned over a large bratwurst and dark beer-fed belly. Each of his maul-sized hands held a serrated bayonet crusted with blood. Isaiah approached him slowly. He shot a quick glance out the window. The sun still hovered a decent way above the horizon. He glanced back at the big man. No movement. Hello. Still nothing. Isaiah put the shotgun up to the man's ribs and poked with the barrel. The body jiggled a bit. It came back to stillness without a response. The Mastiff growled. It's all right, girl. This big fella's dead. For now, anyways. Isaiah chewed his lip uncertainly. Well, fuck. Come sunset, I don't want to have to be thinking about your big ass coming for me. Isaiah slung the shotgun. He grabbed the man's boots. He got one of them under each arm, then he dragged him backward. The bayonets clattered to the floor. The big man's back and head hit the ground hard as Isaiah hauled him off the bed. It took every ounce of leg power he had to drag the massive corpse down the hallway. He dropped the legs and took a break halfway to the stairs. Isaiah was sweating now for sure. He stretched his injured ankle, caught his breath, then he put the man's boots back under his arms and carried on. Once he got him down the stairs, things eased up a bit as gravity lent a helping hand. Each time the fellow's head bounced off a step, the Mastiff barked at it. The barking was not helpful, but each time Isaiah told her to cut it out, it just made her bark more, assuming it was part of the game. Isaiah dragged the body out the front porch, down the steps, into the snow. He got it a dozen yards from the porch, then he stopped. He dropped him, stood back, stretching his lower back and checking the sun's descent. Still, maybe an hour and a half before it disappeared for good. Isaiah left the body where it was and jogged back up into the house, the Mastiff on his heels. It took less than a minute for him to reappear, lugging the kerosene can and a box of the Vulcan matches from the generator room with him. He reached the body, which had already acquired a dusting of snow. Isaiah unscrewed the cap and tipped it, splashing the yellowy liquid up and down the body, thoroughly saturating it. He stood it back and let out a deep sigh, shaking his head. Sorry about this, friend. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. My singing don't get you, then baby, my rhyming must. He lit a match and set it to the man's boot. The flame caught and licked up the body to the head and down the other leg. Isaiah stood back. He pocketed the matchbox and watched the burn take for a moment. Yeah, ashes to ashes. Then he turned and jogged back up the front steps with the dog. In the kitchen, he refilled his kerosene lantern and left the half-empty can behind. He lit the lantern, shut the door, and headed back down the stairs into the generator bunker, wishing he had a way to lock the kitchen door from the inside. At the generator, he walked to the central control panel and played with the two levers. He squeezed the handle on the shaft brake and released it, then pulled on the clutch and dropped the gears into play. All the generator needed now to fulfill its name was the steam's energy. Isaiah checked the firebox. The water in the viewing tank had some bubbles coming up, but no boil going yet. He stoked the coal with the shovel and pumped the bellows until it was glowing hot and orange. Ain't no rush in that, he said to himself. He looked to the Mastiff. We done all we can, Black Betty. If it's gonna fire up, it's gonna fire up. Regardless, I ain't spending no more time fretting about it. Come on, let's get. As I opened the door into the spiral stairwell and followed it down, 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 into the dark passageway of the San Quentin Canal, Black Betty beside him. When they got to the canal tunnel, Isaiah walked down the tracks to the electric barge tractor. He released the brake and rolled it until it was flush with the door, sealing it shut. He secured the handbrake and stood back satisfied. Good enough will have to do. He and the Mastiff jogged into the darkness, heading back toward the entrance proper.